Hello, welcome back to the kitchen. Today we're going to be making some blueberry pancakes. Alright, so we're going to start by measuring out our dry ingredients and put them in one bowl, and then we're going to measure out the non-dry ingredients and put them in a different bowl. So our ingredients are flour, salt, baking powder, oil. I have here canola oil and olive oil. It doesn't matter which one you want to use. And I also have butter, 2 eggs, blueberries obviously. You can have frozen or fresh blueberries. I checked a bunch of different recipes just to see how people normally do it, and some called for fresh, some called for frozen, and some said you could use either. Some said if you're using frozen to thaw them ahead of time, and some didn't specify, so I'm guessing it doesn't really matter. These have been sitting out on the counter for about a half hour, so they're probably partly thawed. And of course, some sugar. Okay, so for my pancakes today, I decided to use whole wheat flour, which is what I almost always use. I just like the taste better, and it's also better for you. And this specific kind is called white whole wheat flour. It's still 100% whole wheat flour, but they make it more fine. I'm not sure exactly how they do it. It's finer and lighter in some way, so it's supposed to be better for baked goods than just the regular whole wheat flour is. Right, you need 2 cups of flour. So I'm going to scoop out the flour, and then I'm going to level it off with the back of the knife. So I make little ridges in the top like that, and then just to make sure it's even, and then just scrape it off the rest of the way, right? You don't want to ever pack your flour down into the cup, so because I'm kind of digging my cup in like this, it gets packed a little bit, which you're not really supposed to do. So my way of making up for that is after I measure it, I just take out a big pinch and put it back to make up for the fact that I packed it in a little bit without meaning to. Alright, next dry ingredient is our 4 tablespoons of sugar. Sorry if this is old hat to you, but just in case there's people that don't know, I always like to say this is a tablespoon and this is a teaspoon. So if the tablespoon, if you ever see it abbreviated, it's capital T BSP. If you see this one abbreviated, the teaspoon, it's lowercase tsp. Just so you don't get confused, because as you can see, they are different. Alright, so same thing basically. Scoop it out and then level it off with the back. And I don't really have to worry about packing it by accident because the sugar is made up of such hard grains. They don't really get packed in the same way that flour can. Alright, and now we need 4 teaspoons of baking powder. And oh, here's another comparison here, just in case you don't know. This is baking powder, this is baking soda. They are different. They are both called leavening agents, which means that's what makes it rise and be puffy instead of flat and hard like a hockey puck. So these are very important ingredients. They are different. Some recipes call for both, or some call for one or the other. This recipe calls for baking powder. And the nice thing about a baking powder tin is it comes with this little handy dandy scraper, so you don't even need to get a separate butter knife to level it off. 1, 2, 3, 4. And finally 1 teaspoon of salt. This is just a regular salt, like table salt. Okay, so because of the way they make the container, it's a little hard to level off. So I usually just pour it in until it looks like it's basically the right amount, and then I just dump it in. Salt isn't the same as a leavening agent. It's not like a crucial ingredient, it's more like for the taste. So if you get it a little off, it's not really a big deal. So it's okay, I think, to measure it that way. Alright, so here's our dry ingredients. We're gonna whisk them up. Right, and this has two purposes. It's obviously to mix them, but also it makes the flour get fluffier. Some recipes will say that you have to sift your flour first, and this is sort of like the lazy way if you don't want to sift your flour, because whisking the flour also helps it get more air into it, same as sifting. Maybe not quite as perfectly as sifting, but if you're not being too picky, which I'm not, you can just whisk it. Alright, now it's time for our non-dry ingredients, which we're going to do in this bowl. So the first one is 2 cups of milk. Whoops, I gotta get the milk. Alright, so we're doing 2 cups of milk here. And this is a liquid measuring cup. There, hopefully you can see that. So I'm measuring up to the line that says 1 cup. One, 2. Okay, now the other thing we have to do is 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter that is melted, or you can use 4 tablespoons of vegetable oil. My oil is running a little low here, the canola oil, which you can use in place of vegetable oil. It's running a bit low, so I'm going to do the 4 tablespoons of melted butter instead. And since my measuring cup there is already dirty, I'm going to put my butter in there and use that to melt it in the microwave. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this, you see that? The little markings, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 4 tablespoons. So I'm going to cut there. This one doesn't want to cut because it's really easy to cut it like this if it's still cold, but I actually had it sitting out on the counter, so it doesn't want to be cut. Alright, so I'm going to have to open the paper and just cut where I made the groove. Alright, I'm going to put this in for 30 seconds, I think will be good. Okay, our next ingredient is our 2 large eggs. So I'm going to crack my eggs and put them in here. I'm going to put the shells in the compost. And I started this special compost, which is only for eggshells, because when it comes time to plant the tomatoes, when it comes time to plant the tomatoes, it's really good to put eggshells down in the hole where you plant the tomato plant, because it gives calcium to the plants. So that's why I do that. So I just crack it till it gets a little dent in it, and then just push my thumbs into that little crack, and then pry it open. Alright, so finally we're going to add our melted butter and then whisk all of this together. Let me close this up and wash my hands because they're eggy. Alright, so that is totally melted. I probably could have done 20 seconds and it would have been good too. Okay, so we're going to whisk this up until it's completely combined and we can't see any egg yolks or other separate ingredients. So now we have to add our dry ingredients, but first I'm going to get the oven started heating up with my big skillet on top. So I use a big skillet like this. You could use a skillet similar to this. If you have a cast iron one, that's cool too. This one's stainless steel. Or if you have one of those big griddles, whether it's on the oven or an electric one, any of that would work. Alright, so I turned mine up a little higher than medium, just to start with. I will turn it down once we get going. Medium is pretty good for this. I would say start with medium or a little higher and then turn it down, since it can take, the first batch usually cooks slower just because it takes a little longer to get heated up. Alright, so I'm putting this down in my pan, this last little bit of oil here, to oil the pan. Probably just put in too much because I got distracted, but it'll be okay. Alright, so let's add our dry ingredients in here. This one I usually just like to rinse out because it's not really dirty. You don't have to wash it with soap because it only had dry stuff in it. So it saves on dishwashing. Now we whisk our dry ingredients into our liquid ingredients, but we only whisk it until it's just combined, which means don't over whisk it. The reason why you don't want to over whisk it is because you can end up deflating it. That sounds funny, but we want it to be puffy, so our pancakes will be nice and puffy and fluffy. So if you overbeat it, you can take some of the air out of it, and we don't want that. You can even see, if you look closely, you can see how even the batter itself looks sort of puffy slightly, and you can see all the air bubbles in there. So that's definitely what we want. Alright, there's still a few lumps, but it's okay if you have a few little lumps. Just make sure there's no actual flour and such that's not mixed in. Alright, this is good. So we're going to pour the first couple onto our skillet here. I think it might be hot enough, so we'll see how it goes. Alright, I'm going to spread my oil around a little bit more first. This feels pretty hot, but if you wanted to test it, you could just take a little water and flick it on. Okay, so those little droplets of water that I flicked on, they sizzled just a bit, so it is hot enough. I like to use a ladle to put the pancake batter onto the griddle. I just think it makes it so much easier than a spoon, or some people say to use a measuring cup, but I think it's easier with the ladle. I'm going to take this out so it's not in the way. And let's give you a view here. Alright, so I was able to fit 3 on. Now, some of the recipes, actually most of the recipes for blueberry pancakes, called for folding the blueberries into the batter itself. One called for sprinkling them on top. So I'm going to try the sprinkling on top method first. Alright, so we're going to let these go for a bit, and what we're looking for is that the edges are going to become slightly dry looking. We want to look for edges that are dry, and even more importantly, we want to look for bubbles. So you might see that there's some little bubbles starting to form, and those bubbles are then going to pop, and then they're going to reform, sort of like bubbles in lava. It pops, and then a second later, you can't even tell there was ever a bubble there because it closes back over. What we're going to look for is when the bubbles pop and then they leave a little crater mark behind. That's how we know it's time to flip the pancakes over. Okay, so as you can see, there are bubbles that are popping, and they're leaving behind little craters, sort of like here and here. And the edges are starting to look slightly more dry, less liquidy. So I'm going to try and flip one here, see how this goes. Okay, that was pretty good. Oh, okay. Okay, this one is a little bit stuck. see if I can get that while holding the iPad. Maybe? Okay, that one's not ready yet. And part of the problem is I did add a little bit too much oil, and the oil is sort of pooling over at that end of the pan, and it is making that pancake be just a little bit too squishy. So I'm gonna let some of the oil flow over to the other end, and just wait a few minutes before trying to flip this one here. Alright, let's give this another try. There. Over there. And let's look at these two that I flipped a few minutes ago and see how they're looking on the other side. Okay, the blueberries are sticking. I was afraid of that. Alright, I'll let those go just a bit longer since they were a little pale on the other side. Alright, I flipped these a couple more times and they look good on both sides. So I'm going to put them on my pancake plate over here. Alright, this is where I put the finished pancakes. Some people like to put a plate in the oven on low, like 200 degrees, and then keep them in there. Or some people will turn on one of their other burners on the oven on low, if it's a plate that's safe to do that with, and just set the plate on top of the low burner. I don't really mind if these cool off because, and that is to keep them hot until you're ready to serve them, by the way. But I don't mind if these cool down because I'm going to save most of these for tomorrow to share with some people, and I'm only going to eat a few of them today. So it's alright if they start to cool off. Okay, since I'm out of the canola oil, I'm going to use a bit of olive oil. To re-oil my pan and spread this around. Alright, and we're going to pour 3 more pancakes. I'll show you once more now that without the blueberries you can see the pattern of bubbles even better. Ooh, come on there. Ooh, oh boy, I made a mess there. Okay, that's alright. Alright, so you can see that the bubbles are pretty big and obvious, and when they pop, they leave a little crater. We made some of these a little bit too big. No. It's pretty hard to flip them. Okay. This one is a little bit too wet, so I'm going to try again later. Oh, I'll try again later if it will slide off. Come on. Okay. This one should be dry enough. There we go. It would have been better if I'd made these just a little bit smaller, so that we had more wiggle room with trying to flip them. But, well. Right, this one seems to be not getting quite cooked. Oh, sorry, you can't see. This one seems to be not getting cooked quite well enough over on that side, so I'm gonna move my pan. Because my pan is so big, it doesn't necessarily fit that evenly over the burner, so sometimes one edge won't get cooked as well. So that's why I like to rotate it like that. Now it's time to do the second method of adding our blueberries, which is to just put them into the batter and then fold them in. Oh, forgot I had a spoon in there. Well, got that taken care of. So we're going to fold them in. So the point of folding is that it is more careful than stirring. because if we stir too much, we could cause some of the air to come out of our batter. So with folding, you just go down the middle and flip over. And you turn your bowl. Sorry. Then we go down the middle and flip over. Normally you would do this with a spatula, but since this is already dirty, I'm just going to use this. Go down the middle and under half of the dough and flip over on top of the other half of the dough. And already I think that's pretty well mixed, so I think we're done here. So let's put some of our lovely blueberry pancakes, which are very blue, onto our griddle. So that's sort of a fun part of this method, is that your batter actually starts to turn blue, especially if you're using the frozen berries that have started to thaw and the juices are leaking out of them. So that's definitely fun, especially when it looks sort of marbled like that and it's a little bit blue, but you can still see the original color. Alright, they're a little bit more watery, as you can see, due to the blueberry juice, so that's okay. It just means they get a little thinner and a little crisper as they cook. Alright, so our last pancakes have just come off the griddle. I turned off my oven and I'm about to try some pancakes. So I put on some butter, which is already melted, and I also discovered recently that I really like olive oil on my pancakes. That might sound a little weird to some people, but I don't know, it's really good to me. So you'll have to let me know what you like to have on your pancakes. And I did heat these up 30 seconds in the microwave because they got a little bit cool while I was waiting. And my maple syrup here, I've had this out on the counter to help it get to room temperature. It was still a little cool though, so I put it in the microwave for 30 seconds. If you do that, it's very important that you take the lid off first so that the heat can escape. And 30 seconds was definitely plenty. So, oh, that's a lot. Okay. Alright, I hope you had fun making some pancakes today. Let me know what kind of toppings you like on your pancakes or special mix-ins. And let me know if you prefer, if you are a blueberry fan, if you prefer to sprinkle them on the top while the pancakes are in the pan, or if you like the stirring it into the batter method better. Alright, bon appetit and see you next week in the kitchen. Bye!